For more analysis on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we're now joined via Zoom by Dorcas Ettang, Conflict Transformation and Peace Studies Senior Lecturer at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Thank you so much for making the time to speak to us today.
Thank you for having me.
Your work in conflict transformation and peace studies helps to reframe the way in which peace-building initiatives are discussed and pursued. Has this been an interesting development for you that's taking place in Russia and Ukraine in terms of blending what you've been studying academically and what is taking place currently?
Yes, I think the current crisis between Russia and Ukraine is a perfect example of why peace building is so necessary, why we need to find ways to prevent conflict before they get to this stage. And I think for students of conflict transformation and peace building, it's important to learn from this crisis. How do we prevent conflict from escalating to full military action? And if in the case of a full military action, how do we ensure that it does not escalate further? And when we look at the current developments, there seems to be more focus on arming, providing funds to arm Ukraine, and Russia itself is developing or has put its nuclear arsenal on alert. And so there's so much discussion on arms and military action and very little voice on peace building and conflict resolution and mediation. And so this is a perfect case for peace-building students and academics as well to begin to think through how do we bring a swift resolution to this conflict in the midst of so much noise on arming and so on.
Focus on arming, but the organization at the center of this conflict, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is itself a military alliance. Just at the weekend, just in terms of how we factor them into this conflict, at the weekend, the Ukrainian president sent out a message to the US. The US has said that they're not sending boots on the ground. And he sent out a message saying, I need ammunition, not a ride, and responding to the US offer to take him out of Ukraine.
Yes, I think the noise about arming and weapons and military action seems to be so dominant. And it's worrying because where is the place for mediation? Where is the place for diplomacy? Where is the place to have peaceful conversations about resolving this for the benefit of the citizens that are at stake? And if these conversations on military arming and military weapons and asking for more support for military assistance continues to dominate the agenda, I worry what will happen in the days coming forward. And so at the level of political leadership, there needs to be a change in rhetoric. Is there a political will to find a peaceful resolution? Because at the end of the day, who are the victims? The citizens of Ukraine, the citizens of Russia, and the effects are widespread, right? No matter where you are today, as a citizen of Ukraine or Russia around the world, it's very scary times that we are in. And so for political leaders at the level of President Putin and the president of Ukraine, there needs to be a switch in rhetoric to actually desire peaceful resolution and the quick cessation of conflict.
It's not completely true, though, that the only conversation is about militarization. There's those talks coming through today with the United Nations leading the way, and also that conversation between the two countries. It's understood that these talks will take place at the Belarusian-Ukraine border. How important is the choice of venue for these talks to succeed?
Very important. The choice of venue is critical. And for me, I think we need to be careful about statements and speeches. We need to see action, right? Because we can hear views and perspectives on these issues, but without action by both parties, by the United Nations to actively work on bringing peace and restoring stability to the region, then we cannot see an end to this. Neutrality is absolutely key in this context. And I think this is where the challenge will be. Who is a neutral party when we talk about global politics? When we look across the different continents, which countries stand out as neutral parties that both Ukraine and Russia can willingly listen to and give that space? And Belarus, of course, is an option on the table. However, Ukraine is quite resistant to that because of the relationship within Belarus and Russia. And so this is quite critical. Where are the actors that will present some form of neutrality and still be able to bring mediation efforts to this situation?
Does it add to neutrality that both countries are going into the meeting without any preconditions?
Yes, it does. It's really hard to say at this point how the talks will come out and what the outcome will be. And so I think this is a good first step. The door is open for communication. I think once we start seeing the parties actually meeting together and having those conversations, then we can begin to get more clear outlines or outcomes of what the decisions will be. But it will not be easy. It will not be easy. This is a long-standing issue. It goes back into history. And are both countries willing to budge? Are both countries willing to make concessions? And that will be where the issue will be and what the future holds.
So how significant is it that these talks are being organized by President Putin's ally, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko? You touched on it a bit just in your conversation.
It's a difficult one, I think, for choosing Belarus and the president as this individual to help to mediate. I think the United Nations needs to play a stronger role. I know that conversations have begun to take place. I know that the Secretary General has spoken very clearly against Russia's military action. And so I think beyond the president of Belarus, other actors are very critical in playing a role in this process.
A lot has been said about South Africa's response, with a weekend newspaper report saying that there's discord within the presidency just in terms of the harmonizing of South Africa's response to this, although President Cyril Ramaphosa clarified it, speaking to media yesterday. What role can Africa play in this conflict and in bringing about peace?
I think Africa's role is very critical. Africa has its own experiences with conflict over decades. We've experienced the impact it has on the continent. Even the current crisis between Ukraine and Russia has significant impact on our economy as a continent and so on. And so we need to be part of this discussion. For Africa, it is important that peace building and peace efforts and a peaceful resolution of the conflict is our priority. The need to have a cessation of the violence is something that we need to speak to. Of course, Africa is a continent with so many countries and different interests with countries in Europe. And so this could perhaps hinder how vocal we are as a continent and so on and so forth. But I think we need to be champions of preventing further humanitarian crisis. We need to be champions of peace building in conversations and in those spaces that we can leverage some influence, be it in the United Nations, in bilateral relationships and so on. We need to leverage our voice and call for peace and stability.
And just in trying to understand the way forward, what sort of challenges has this conflict brought up in the space of conflict resolution and peace studies? Just in terms of going forward, how can justice prevail going forward?
What this crisis has shown is that peace efforts and creating a peaceful world is not easy. I mean, we know the case of Syria and the crisis there that has been ongoing. Afghanistan is also a developing case, and there are many little conflicts across the world. And so for peace builders, it's a time of reflection as well, and seeing that is a peaceful world really achievable? right? And many a times when governments focus on political engagement and military action, they forget the victims. And who are the victims? The people on the ground, vulnerable groups, and so on and so forth. And so for peace builders, that's our focus. How do we find ways to protect the vulnerable, to protect those that do not have a voice and perhaps are facing the brunt of this crisis? And what happens now? States are still very powerful. How do we ensure that there is peace in situations like this?
So just in terms of your thoughts about how Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has handled this, he came into his presidency not having a political history. He came from the entertainment space. He was thrust into the world space from that quid pro quo conversation of his with former US President Donald Trump. Is he up to the task?
That's a very interesting question. I think with every political actor, whether you're a president or a prime minister, you benefit from those around you, right? Your advisors and so on. And I think with the right advisors around him who are able to be objective and show him both sides of the story, he can benefit from their expertise. And yeah, you learn through experience. So he's now in this position and so has to take his role as president and move forward. But again, it is important to always remember this crisis has severe implications on the politics, the economy, the society of Ukraine. And so this must be paramount in his decisions and in his actions.
Well, we, I suppose, hope to see how this all unfolds. And as you were saying, the concerns about civilians. What are your thoughts here and what civil society can do, the global civil society space can do to help civilians cope with this conflict?
Yes, civil society organizations globally have been very active in vocalizing their disdain and lack of support for the actions by both Russia and Ukraine. And I think this is very key. There needs to be more voices, louder voices for peace and conflict resolution, because it seems sometimes the only voice is about military arming and potential nuclear war and so on and so forth. And so civil society need to begin to continue to make their voices heard on peace and resolving this peacefully. They need to engage their governments, put pressure on their governments, and use all platforms. I think one thing that is clear with this conflict is the use of social media and the use of the internet. And so around the world, citizens, civil society need to make their voice heard and need to begin to find themselves or push themselves into spaces where they can influence governments and influence the narratives that are shaping this crisis.
I wanted to ask you a last quick question, just in terms of the announcement by the Russian President Putin that he has activated the army in terms of the nuclear capabilities. How worrisome is this in terms of the conversation of global safety?
I think it's very worrisome. It's very worrisome. For some, even the action by Russia, the full-scale attack on Ukraine, for some was not going to happen, right? There have been reports that there was news about this for months, but nothing major has been done. So we should not underestimate anybody. We should not underestimate any government, any political leader at all. We need to take this seriously and really begin to push for concerted efforts to stop this nuclear war or nuclear arsenal from being released. So it's an urgent matter. We cannot predict action. We need to be preventative rather than reactive.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for making the time. Dorcas Ettang, a conflict, transformation and peace studies senior lecturer at the University of KwaZulu-Natal.